the Corvon swarm carriers measured deployment not in units but in saturation. They did not send terms. They did not send warnings. The vault of whispered ledgers had 300 years of amber light burning in its corridors. Every one of those years ended in the same hour. Welcome back to Remnants of the Veil, Episode 12, What the Swarm Keeps. The first Skitter-drones entered the vault of whispered ledgers at 0400 by the ship's internal clock. They came through 7 breach points simultaneously, not the main docking bay. The outer hull, where the swarm carriers had spent 40 minutes identifying structural weaknesses with the patient accuracy of organisms that had been breaching things for 10,000 years. 6 inches of Thalsari hull plating, 4 layers of insulation, the pressurized corridors of a vessel that had been a city for 3 centuries and had never been built to be a fortress. 20,000 drones entered in 20 seconds. Krennak was already inside when the breach alarm sounded. Thorruk had sent him back in. The first wave of civilians was loaded, boarding pods sealed, ready to launch. When the report came through from soldiers still moving in the lower sections, a group alive, cut off, pushing toward the bay but not yet clear. Thorruk had looked at the report and looked at the pods and made the call. Krennak takes a force back through and pushes them out. Thorruk holds the bay and manages the loading. Krennak had gone back in at pace, his column moving fast through corridors that were still clear. The breach alarms found him deep in the residential access, already pushing toward the cut-off civilians, the 7 simultaneous hull failures opening behind him while he was moving toward what was ahead. Thorruk heard the 7 alarms at the bay while the last civilians were still moving through the hatch. He kept them moving. The vault held over 300,000 people. Not soldiers, not warriors, merchants, clerks, the laborers and brokers and displaced civilians who had come to trade at the most famous market in 6 sectors and had not left before the world ended. Some were armed with whatever they had found in the hours since the fighting started, which was not nothing. A dying ship of that size has weapons hidden in its own decay. Fire suppression tools, maintenance equipment, the private collections of beings who had expected to need protection from other beings, not from something that moved like water and ate like fire. It would not be enough. Every person still alive in the vault already knew this. They had known it since the drones began. Organizing outside the hull, felt it in the subsonic vibration of 20,000 bodies moving together toward a thing they intended to consume. The feeling came through the walls before the walls opened. When they opened, what followed was not a battle. It was an ending. In the residential access corridor that connected Deck 19's junction to the outer docking approach, Vash and M had been moving for 6 minutes when the outer hull opened. The breach point was 80 meters behind them. They did not hear it as an explosion. They felt it as a pressure change and a sound that was not a sound, the specific wrongness of a hull section failing and the atmosphere beyond it rushing in to equalize. Vasha turned. The corridor behind them was still amber lit, still showing the approach they had just walked through, and at its far end something was moving that was not the corridor. 80 meters of amber light between him and it. 80 meters that the corridor made look like distance and was not. 20,000 drones had entered the vault in 20 seconds. A portion of that stream had come through the breach 80 meters behind Vasha and M, and the stream did not slow, and the stream did not stop, and the stream did not distinguish between the corridor it was moving through and the beings that were in it. Vasha ran. M ran. Their daughter was on Vasha's shoulder, awake now. Her face turned toward what was coming with the clear attention of someone too young to understand that attention was not sufficient. They made 11 meters. The stream reached them at the 12-meter mark in the corridor had red blood on its floor in the specific patterns of something that moves through a space at speed without slowing, and the amber light burned on above it, steady, designed for buyers, illuminating what the corridor had become and what was no longer in it. On the corridor floor, where the amber light fell steady and warm as a market day, a small shoe lay on its side, the kind worn by something that had not yet learned to walk long distances, still new enough to show the shape of the foot that had been in it. The drones moved on. The stream did not stop. The vault had more corridors. Warlord Thorruk heard the 7 breach alarms in the same second and was already moving. The docking bay was 3 junctions ahead. His soldiers were behind him in a column 4 abreast, the formation in which they killed most efficiently and died least. "Breach at hull sections 7, 12, 14, his second said. "Tactical feed in the helmet display. 7 red markers spreading across the vault's internal map. 18, 21, 23, 29. 7 points." Thorruk had expected 3. He recalculated without breaking stride. Formation change, extended column. 2 rearguard squads, fixed position at junction 7A, hold 60 seconds and follow. The column adjusted without slowing. The first drones came from junction 6, not a wave, not the disorganized scatter of insects disturbed from a nest. They came in a stream, 5 wide, the exact width of the corridor, moving at the coordinated speed of harmonic targeting. Each drone was smaller than a Drakar. Each was faster. They carried no weapons beyond the blade limbs and acid glands. Their biology had spent millennia perfecting. They made no sounds the human ear could call language. They made sounds that registered in the chest before the ears, a subsonic chittering that came through the hull plating and the floor and the walls simultaneously, as though the vault itself had learned to speak Korvan. The rear guard met. Them at junction 7A-20 Drakar soldiers with siege rifles. The rifles were built for anti-armor work, heavy rounds that hit things and kept hitting them through whatever was on the other side. The front rank of the stream came apart in the first volley, the second rank in the second. The third volley hit before the corridor had finished processing the second, and for 4 seconds the junction was nothing but noise and chitinous wreckage, carapace fragments hitting walls already slick with the acid residue the drones vented when they died. The stream did not stop. It deepened. The drones used the debris of their own forward elements as cover, not tactically, not because the harmonic had issued an instruction to use fallen bodies as shields, but because the harmonic had directed the next rank forward, and the next rank found the debris in its path and climbed over it because that was the direction. 10,000 organisms making 10,000 micro-decisions in service of one macro-decision. The effect was indistinguishable from tactical intelligence. The rearguard fired until their barrels overheated and fired again. 30 seconds. 40. The junction floor disappeared under wreckage. The corridor temperature climbed in the closed spaceway of 20,000 living things pushing through it. Wet heat, the chemical bite of drone biology, the copper and ash smell of siege rifles. Pushed past their rated cycle, amber blood ran from cuts the soldiers had not yet registered. Blade limbs finding the gaps in Drakar plating with the statistical certainty of enough of them trying. At 60 seconds, the rear guard pulled back. 12 of 20. They fell into the column without breaking stride. No ceremony, no accounting. The Drakar counted losses by what remained, not by what was gone. Behind them, the junction filled. Thorruk did not look back. "Next junction," he said. They moved. Outside, the swarm carriers held their positions and they did not stop. From the carrier's formation, the vault of whispered ledgers had become something other than what it had been built to be. Breach points multiplied across 3 centuries, of Thalsari hull plating, each new opening a darker wound against the ship's running surface, the bioplasma discharges finding their compound targets with the patient inevitability of a calculation being completed. Through the breach points in the sections that still had power, amber light bled into the vacuum. The warm, steady glow of a commercial district visible from the outside through holes that should not exist. The vault's interior illuminating. The void around it in slow, dying pulses. The harmonic had identified the vault's structural failure points hours ago. Each bioplasma discharge struck a section the previous one had weakened. Compound failures opening in cascade. The ship coming apart not in the dramatic violence of a warship taking a killing hit, but in the slow, patient manner of something being consumed from outside. New breach points opened as the rear guard fought at junction 7A. 3 more hull sections failed in the first 20 minutes. The drone count inside the vault climbed past the number the swarm carriers had launched with. They had been producing since the battle started. They did not run out. They produced and launched in the mechanical patience of something that measured deployment not in units, but in saturation. Inside the vault, in the sections far from Thorruk's corridor, the sound changed. It started as alarms, hull breach frequencies, distorted communications, 300,000 people discovering that the thing they had been told was being managed was no longer being managed. The alarms layered over each other until they became a single sustained noise, undifferentiated and meaningless. Beneath them, other sounds took shape. In the vault's residential tiers, the midship decks where long-term inhabitants had kept quarters for years, some for decades, beings for whom this city of corridors and market light was simply home. A dock worker named Sarah heard the alarms and did not run. She had been carrying her cargo loader's pry bar since the first hull alarm 4 hours ago. 4 feet of reinforced steel lifted from a maintenance rack by instinct before her mind had caught up to what her body already understood. The pry bar was the difference. She did not know the difference between what and what. She had it, and that was the calculation entire. When the drones came through the residential corridor's eastern vent, the smell arrived before they did. Acid and chitin and the hot metal stench of bioplasma discharge that had been working through the outer hull for hours, concentrated now into a corridor that had smelled, an hour ago, of recycled air and someone's cooking on the deck above. Sarah swung, full overhead, her shoulders burning with the familiar burn of real weight at speed. The first drone's carapace split. She adjusted her grip for the third because the impact was vibrating up into her wrists differently than a cargo container, lighter, faster, the resistance wrong, and hit the third and the fourth and kept her feet wide and her weight low. Fifth one took the hit and kept coming, blade limb finding the gap above her left collarbone before she had completed the swing. She felt the cold intrusion of something entering a place her body considered private, drove her elbow into the drone's carapace, shoved it back and raised the pry bar. Red blood ran down her arm and across her hand and made the grip uncertain. She gripped harder. The 6th drone came apart. The 7th found the same gap the 5th had opened. The pry bar fell. Sarah braced against the corridor wall with her good arm and drove her shoulder into the drone. Not a technique, not training, simply the body's oldest instruction, and shoved it back into the stream. Red blood on the floor, a handprint, on the wall where she had caught herself. She went down, and the corridor moved on without her, and the drones did not stop because the harmonic had not issued an instruction to stop. 3 decks below, in the intelligence warrens, the deep corridors where the vault's real commerce had always been conducted, sealed rooms behind unmarked doors that smelled of server heat and old anxiety, a human signals analyst named Harwick had barricaded his office door with server racks 40 minutes ago and had been broadcasting since. Every open frequency, every signal the vault's damaged array could still carry. Fleet positions, drone entry points, sections still clear, sections already gone. He updated as the information changed. The information changed constantly. His viewport faced the internal atrium. He watched the market deck below between broadcasts because he could not make himself not watch. At 14 minutes, he stopped seeing people running and started seeing why they had stopped. He kept broadcasting. 17 frequencies active. 3 almost certainly reaching ships still in range. He broadcast the clear corridors again, the drone positions again. His voice level, because signals analysts kept their voices level. Not from training exactly, from the accumulated habit of a job that required clarity over everything else, where a voice that wavered put people wrong. At 38 minutes, the server racks shifted. The door held. He broadcast the drone positions one final time with maximum specificity. Junction markers, deck numbers, coordinates triangulated from breach alarm timestamps. 90 seconds of data transmitted clean. 2 of the 3 ships he could confirm on the sector display changed their approach vectors. He saw it happen before his power cut. He did not know what the changed vectors meant. He did not know if anyone had received what he had sent in a form that was useful. He knew he had sent it correctly. That had always been the only part that was his. In the lower market, the sprawling commercial floors where hundreds of species had traded for 3 centuries, a group of 30 civilians had barricaded A junction with market crates, and were holding it with a combination of a single energy weapon, 2 maintenance tools, and the ferocity of people who had nowhere left to go. A Thalsari merchant who had spent his entire adult life carefully avoiding anything that required physical courage stood at the left side of the barricade with a display stand he had torn from its mounting. He had never hit anything with anything in his life. He learned quickly. He learned in the manner of people who have arrived at the last possible moment for learning things. The barricade held for 11 minutes. That was 11 minutes of corridor the drones did not have. 11 minutes mattered. None of it was enough. The drones moved through the vault completely, efficiently, with the absolute indifference of a force that had been given one instruction, and the numbers to carry it out. 300,000 people were in the vault when the breach alarm sounded. The vault's running lights burned on in the sections that still had power, amber and steady, designed for the comfort of buyers. Corridor 12 was a market connector, one of the broad thoroughfares built to accommodate commercial traffic. Twice as wide as the service corridors Thorruk's column had been using. Tall ceiling, multiple entry points from the merchant decks. Above. The fastest route to the docking bay. It was where the vault's remaining garrison had made their line, not Drakor garrison, not Velithari, who had withdrawn as the swarm completed its positioning. What remained was the vault's own security. Force, the species the Thalsari had hired over decades of operation. Beings who had signed contracts for a patrol shift on a trade station and had been present when the world changed and had stayed because their contracts said to and because they had nowhere else to go. Humans, most of them. Station security. Ex-military from 3 different factions. Beings who had taken the job because it was a living and were now spending it because it was the only currency left. They had barricaded the junction's northern entrance with crates and market equipment. 2 barricades, angled to cover the 3 drone entry points the garrison commander had assessed as highest probability. A crossfire lane between them. It was not good. It was better than nothing. The drones came from the eastern gallery, not the 3 anticipated points. The eastern gallery, a wide commercial space overlooking the junction from above, its shop fronts shattered, its floor 2 levels up, was not among the high-probability entries. The drones came through it in a stream that hit the garrison's left flank, while both barricades faced north. The crossfire lane became a killing ground facing the wrong direction. Thorruk's column entered Corridor 12 at the southern junction. At the same moment, the drones hit the garrison from the east. Not a collision, a compression, 2 things in the same space at the same time, each requiring all available room, neither able to yield because yielding meant dying. The column met. The garrison's fighting retreat at the junction center. The garrison was backing toward them, firing into the eastern gallery stream. The drones were coming from above and from the north and from 2 additional breach points opening in the ceiling as the swarm carriers outside found another weakness, and the ceiling was raining them, each impact a wet crack of carapace on. Thalsari flooring. The acid discharge from damaged drones eating into the surface and spreading dark stains. Push through, Thorruk said. Not a tactical instruction, a physical one. He moved. The column hit the garrison's retreating line, and the 2 forces merged, not cleanly, not with organizing principle, but with the momentum of everything behind them demanding forward motion. Drakar soldiers in formation collided with station security and backed against the wall positions, and the difference between moving and holding in a space too small for both created a chaos no doctrine had prepared for. The civilians came with. 800 people who had been following the column found themselves at a 3-way contact point, Drakor pushing forward, garrison holding its line, drones coming from above and both flanks. They moved toward what seemed survivable, and what seemed survivable changed every 4 seconds. Krennak's group was in the civilian column. A ceiling section failed. Drone breach from above. A hull panel going under sustained exterior fire. The 2-meter plate coming down in a single piece and taking part of the gallery walkway with it. It came down between Krennak's position and the forward Drakar element. Not instantly lethal. Not a clean separation. 2 tons of Thalsari market infrastructure landing across the junction's center in the space between the rear of Thorruk's soldiers and the front of Krennak's, creating in 4 seconds a barrier the column could not cross without stopping. The sea. Barrier was 8 meters of debris from floor to ceiling, and the drone stream from the eastern gallery was already closing the gap on Krennak's side, moving through the junction's smoke toward the only route to the docking bay, consuming the space between Krennak and the exit with the patient arithmetic of a current that did not need to hurry. Thorruk was on the far side. He could hear Krennak's channel. He could not see him through the smoke and the falling debris. Stopping meant dying. Thorruk saw the barrier. He saw the drone stream closing the route to the docking bay. He knew Krennak was on the wrong side. Krennak looked at him through the smoke and the filling space between them. "Keep moving, Warlord," Krennak said. The channel was still open. His voice was what it had always been. Loud, present, entirely. Too much. "I know what I'm doing. Krennak, I know what I'm doing." A beat. Very short. "I also know what you're doing, Warlord, which is standing there when you should be moving. With respect." Thorruk moved. The column pushed through Corridor 12 and out the far side, taking every civilian who could follow, losing 3 soldiers to the ceiling breach behind them. They did not look back. Behind the barrier, Krennak stood with 61 Drakor soldiers who had not made it through. Krennak took stock of his 61 soldiers with the efficiency of someone who has run his numbers and has no argument with them. 61 Drakor, 12 station security survivors from the garrison, ammunition thin, 400 civilians, pressed against the southern wall. Beings of 7 species with nowhere left because the barrier blocked one exit and the drone stream was filling the other. A human merchant with a cargo hook. 2 Thalsari in their natural forms. Bioluminescent, exposed, cold blue-white light in a corridor that smelled of acid and hot metal, and the iron-wet smell of blood from 4 species on floors never designed to drain it. 3 Velethari diplomats from some tertiary mission that had been aboard when everything changed, their crystal-edged personal weapons drawn, their wards small and precise and built for corridor security, not suppression. The drones were coming, from 3 directions. "All right," Krennak said. He faced the eastern gallery approach, where the stream had thinned but not stopped. "The Warlord reaches the ships. That is done. That is settled." He rolled his neck. His ritual scars pulled against the fresh damage above them. The shoulder wound had sealed but not healed. Amber blood dried brown-dark against his plating in the manner Drakor blood dried in recycled air, tacky and thick and wrong-smelling. "What we do now is make them earn every meter between here and the hull, and we are going to be very loud about it." No one answered. The station security soldiers looked at him with the expression of beings who had run their own numbers and were absorbing the answer without surprise. One of them, a human, older, with the permanent squint of someone who had taken the vault. "Job because it was quiet. Checked her weapon. Charged and ready." She nodded at Krennak. He nodded back. "Loud," he said. The drones hit the eastern gallery at full stream. 61 Drakor soldiers opened fire. The siege rifles turned the first. Ranks to debris. The stream did not thin. The harmonic processed loss as geometry, recalculating density for the next rank. The next rank came through the wreckage and the acid and the heat of a corridor that was already too warm and getting warmer. 20 minutes of siege rifle discharge in an enclosed space, the air heavy with propellant residue and the biological stench of drone matter at volume, a smell that sat at the back of the throat and could not be cleared. The Drakor fired into it. The stream kept coming. The garrison fired from the flanks. Short bursts. Disciplined. Station security counted rounds in a manner that comes from understanding exactly what finite means. The human merchant swung the cargo hook. Full overhead every time. He had spent 30 years lifting things and his arms still knew the motion. The first drone's carapace split. He hit the second before the first had finished falling. His hands were bleeding. The hook's grip wasn't built for what he was asking of it. And he did not stop because stopping was the alternative, and the alternative was not available. The 2 Thalsari moved together, their natural forms, Low and fast, arms longer than borrowed faces allowed, density redistributed into something built for impact rather than elegance. Their cold blue-white bioluminescence lit the corridor in flashes as they drove through a drone cluster at the eastern edge. Not efficiently, not cleanly. The drone's blade limbs found Thalsari biology, and Thalsari biology bled differently. Pale blue luminescent fluid, cold-looking even when it wasn't, spreading across the corridor floor in slow arcs. They kept moving. One went down at the 4-minute mark. Too many simultaneous contacts, the arithmetic catching up. The other did not stop, did not look back, kept moving because the Thalsari understood leverage, and the only remaining leverage was forward motion. The Velithari wards cut in small, precise strikes. Crystallized force directed at carapace gaps with the accuracy of beings who had spent centuries using arcana as a tool. Not enough to stop the stream, enough to hold the flanks, enough to give the human beside them 4 more seconds to reload. And 4 seconds was something. The swarm carriers outside fired. The hull above Corridor 12 took a sustained discharge. 1 hit, 2, the third opening it. Cold light through the breach. The pressure change hit every being in the corridor simultaneously, the air going wrong in a full-body wave, ears and lungs and sinuses all registering the change before the mind did. Krennak grabbed a ceiling, struck one-handed and kept firing with the other. His forearm was bleeding where a blade limb had found the gap between his shoulder plating and arm guard. He had catalogued it, amber blood, slow flow, not immediately relevant, and moved. On. His armor was running hot. He could feel it against the back of his neck, the recycled heat of a suit pushed past its sustainable cycle. His mouth tasted of propellant and the copper salt of his own biology working too hard for too long. 20 minutes of hard contact. His barrel had overheated twice. He was on his sidearm now, making each round mean something. 3 Drakkar soldiers near the breach lost their footing in the pressure differential. 2 caught handholds. 1 did not. Sergeant Hack of Clan Thorruk, 14 years of service, gone through the breach in the instant his hand arrived a half-second too late. The drone stream reorganized in seconds. The harmonic did not pause. The garrison human on the left barricade went down, clean, fast. The mathematics of Skitter-drone assault resolving against a position that had held longer than the numbers said it should. She had been firing until she wasn't. Red blood on the barricade material. Her weapon still aimed at the direction she had been covering. The remaining Thalsari was gone. Krennak did not know the moment. 1 instant at the eastern edge, then not. 40 soldiers. 32. 20. 12 soldiers, his second said. I know, Krennak said. Warlord Thorruk's transponder. Outer hull. The docking bay. He made it. Good, Krennak said. He cleared 4 meters of corridor with the economy of a soldier who has counted down to a number he can hold in one hand. A drone reaching for the Velithari diplomat on his left, still standing, still pressing a ward into service past its rated capacity, violet light flickering at the projection's edges, and Krennak drove his sidearm grip into the carapace and kicked the wreckage into the stream. Second blade limb across the same forearm. More amber blood. Still not relevant. 10 soldiers. 8. This is going well, Krennak said. Sergeant Vrak, on his right, fighting with a broken siege rifle and whatever a broken siege rifle becomes when it is the only thing left, looked at him. It is, Krennak said. He fired. 23 minutes. The warlord has the ships. He fired again. That is going well, Sergeant. Vrak said nothing. She drove the broken rifle into a drone that had closed inside arm distance and used her elbow on the one behind it, and the stream kept coming. And Krennak kept talking because Krennak had never found a situation where talking made it worse, and because there was always something to say about the tactical situation in front of him, and because he was, under everything else, a soldier who had decided long ago that the only way to hold a line was to keep paying attention to it. He paid attention. He paid attention for 4 more minutes. Drone density, barricade integrity, the angle of the breach, the remaining count of every position he could still see. At the 8-soldier mark, what he could see of the northern barricade told him what he needed to know. The crates on its left face had been pushed inward 2 feet by sustained drone contact, the market equipment that had braced them gone somewhere. In the previous 10 minutes, and the structure now leaned at the angle of something that had been holding by compression and was running out of things to compress against. It would hold another 2 minutes, maybe 3. The math did not change what he was doing, but the math was always worth knowing. At the 4-minute mark, the stream hit the southern wall section and the adult holding the Thalsari child, the small one, its borrowed face long gone, its natural, formed the terrified luminescence of something very young, went down, and Krennak was across the corridor before he had decided to move, putting himself in the space the adult had occupied. He put everything he had left between the stream and the wall. He fired once, twice. He did not say anything. The silence where Krennak's voice had been was a shape. It lasted 1 second, then 2. Then it was the absence of something that had been present since the first moment he had followed Warlord Thorruk aboard the vault of whispered ledgers. And it could not be filled, and everyone still alive in Corridor 12 felt it without being able to name it, because none of them had known him long enough to know what they had lost, and all of them had known him long enough to know it was something. The docking bay was burning on 3 walls when Thorruk's column reached it, not from the drones, from the swarm carrier's exterior fire, which had struck the outer hull twice in the last 8 minutes and opened a breach in the upper section. Atmosphere venting slowly. Smoke banked against the ceiling from a fire in the eastern equipment bay that had been burning unattended for 2 hours. The air tasted of hot metal and insulation and the acrid edge of a ship dying from outside. The Drakor moved through it forward. The loading was not orderly. It could not be. The 6 Thrak-class boarding pods were built for 60 Drakor warriors, each, harness points at combat spacing, standing room calibrated for armored bodies in formation. What pressed through the hatches now was not that. A Drakor soldier worked a harness intended for 1 body around 2 civilians who did not fit the geometry, his hands forcing the buckles past their rated positions while the hatch alarm counted. Down behind him, a human, mid-40s, carrying nothing, having left everything in whatever corridor she had come from, stood at the hatch lip in the 2 seconds before it sealed and made the calculation with her eyes. Her body moved. At Pod 4's hatch, a garrison soldier held the frame for 30 seconds past his loading order while the stream of civilians thinned to the last of them, his hands on the frame, watching the corridor behind them for the drone. Signatures his tactical display showed 3 junctions back and closing. He let go of the frame when the last civilian was through. The hatch sealed behind him. The sounds of 6 hatches sealing were the specific sounds of things that were finished and would not open again. 6 Thrak-class boarding pods in their dock clamps, 200 tons each, built for Dreadnought assault insertion, harness points, standing room, no concessions to anything a living thing might need beyond surviving long enough to reach the target. Not built for the civilians pressed 3 and 4 to a harness in the first 4 pods, or the garrison survivors packed into the 5th alongside Drakor soldiers standing in configurations their doctrine had never needed to describe. Every pod sealed past its rated capacity. Every pod held. The pods launched. All 6. Thorruk moved to the last one. At its hatch, he pulled up Krennak's transponder. Active, moving, then still, then the passive code. Armor present, suit system no longer. Drawing power from a living source, he had sent Krennak back in. That was the fact that sat beneath the passive code. The order he had given and the transponder that was no longer active resolved into each other in the 4 seconds he stood at the hatch without moving. The docking bay had breach alarms. On all 4 walls, drone signatures 3 corridors back and closing. The pod behind him held people who had followed his column because he had been the most certain thing in this space, and he was still the most certain thing in this space, and that required him to get into the pod. Warlord, his second said, quietly. Thorruk looked at the passive transponder code, at the junction, at the bay around him, at what it had cost to reach it and what it had cost to fill the pods and what filling the pods had required of every soldier who had held position, long enough for the civilians to board. He stepped back through the hatch. The boarding pod launched. Outside, the 6 boarding pods that had cleared the vault's hull burned away from it on their single-use drives, their ion trails spreading and fading in the void. The vault of whispered ledgers was visible from all 6, 3 centuries old. Half a mile of corridors and market decks and intelligence warrens, home to 1 million souls at its height, the most important address in the known galaxy. 2 new hull breaches opened as the pods cleared, the swarm carriers continuing their work, with the patience of something that had not been told to stop. In the sections that still had power, the vault's commercial lighting held on, amber and steady, designed for buyers. Still burning for no one. Thorruk looked at it through the boarding pod's forward port. The breach points glowed against the hull, 7 original, more since, each one showing amber through the gap, the vault's interior light bleeding into the vacuum in the slow, warm pulses of a city that had not yet understood it was finished. The fist of Vorkoth blinked in the drifting fragment beyond, its emergency lighting still cycling in the sections where the root mass had not yet completed its work. He looked at all of it, the amber and the blink and the breach points multiplying across 3 centuries of hull plating, and the people still inside it that he had left and the one he had sent back. He did not look long. The fleet Kael'vor had left him was 42 ships, not what the Dominion had brought to Sector Auris 7. What remained after the battle, the withdrawal, the hammer and the fist and the 7 vessels that had not survived the engagement. 42 ships at rendezvous coordinates, his clan officers reporting in sequence, the ordered accounting of a force that had absorbed catastrophic loss and was counting what still existed. Thorruk took command of the lead dreadnought from its captain without ceremony, because ceremony had no place in what this moment was. His first officer was waiting on the bridge. "The clan commanders have responded, Warlord." And, the first officer read from his feed, Clan Gravak had acknowledged the Overlord's death and transmitted a formal request for fleet command transfer to Warlord Gravak, citing seniority of force in the sector. Clan Kethis had acknowledged the withdrawal order and nothing else, the silence after it deliberate, calculated, a declaration made by omission. Clan Drekval had not responded. Clan Vor had transmitted a single word. Claim. Thorruk stood in the bridge of a Dreadnought-class warship with 41 ships behind him, and the succession war opening around him like a wound. He had known it would come. He had not known it would come in the first hour. "Thorruk ships," he said. 16 confirmed under direct clan command. 2 have not yet declared. 16 his. 2 uncertain. The rest distributed among clans already positioning. The opening. Moves of a contest with one rule and no other. The Overlord had been dead less than a day. Kael'vor had held 5 clans together for 60 years through the force of what he was, and what he was had died with the hammer, and what remained was this. "All clan commanders," Thorruk said. His voice carried what it carried. The past 12 hours in it, and the 12 hours before that, and everything a warlord accumulates following an overlord for 60 years and then stops following. He opened the channel to all 42 ships. Every clan. Every officer with ears to receive it. The overlord is dead. The succession is open. Every clan knows the law. He let the silence sit for 2 seconds. The strongest wins. Clan Gravak responded immediately. Clan Vor responded. Clan Kethis broke its silence. His first officer was already opening the tactical display before Thorruk had turned to look at it. Formation shifts beginning across the fleet, ships adjusting their positions by fractions, individual clan detachments drawing slightly apart from each other in the deliberate geometry of forces that were no longer certain they were on the same side. The Drakor fleet moved into the dark, not as one organism, as 5. In the first hour after the battle, no faction spoke to any other. The Korvan redistributed their fleet. 16 monarchs recalibrated the harmonic around the space where Kalvren had been, not grief, not mourning, but the structural mathematics of a network reorganizing around a severed node, the living system doing what living systems do when something central is lost, closing around the wound, redistributing load, continuing. The swarm carriers sealed their bays. The drones were recalled in the same silence in which they had been deployed, withdrawn without acknowledgement that what they were withdrawing from was anything other than a completed calculation. The echo gate hung in the void, unguarded, patient. Its pale gold-white glow unchanged, steady, sourceless, indifferent to the 12 hours of violence committed in its vicinity. The entity's remaining fragment drifted away from the gate, the fist of Vorkoth still embedded in its root mass, the vessel's running lights blinking in the sections that still had power. The fragment breathed, its outermost root tendrils still, reached, reflex, biology, the deep instruction of a mind that had lost its cognitive center and was continuing because nothing had told it to stop. It was alive in the way that things remain alive when the news of what has happened has not yet reached every part of them. Whatever had been growing at its core was gone. Wherever the hammer of Kelvor had gone when the warp event took it, the corrupted seed had gone with it. No trajectory, no exit vector. The sector's sensors had nothing to offer and would have nothing to offer for some time. On the Velithari Luminarch E3S, high-resonant Civilith pressed her silver-lined hands to the crystal floor of the resonance chamber and felt the veil stream settle. Not calm. The veil stream was not calm in the aftermath of this many deaths in this short a span. But settling. The turbulence of what had happened becoming, over hours, a frequency added to the frequencies already there. 300,000 deaths did not go unfelt. They went into the current and stayed there, carried forward the way the veil stream carried everything that had happened to it, diminished, changed, but present. Accessible to anything that knew how to listen. She felt the vault in it, the shape of the ending. She said nothing. There was nothing to say that the veil stream had not already said more clearly to anyone with the capacity to hear it. The sector was quiet. The gate waited. The galaxy had changed while it watched, and it had not moved. And whatever it was waiting for was closer than it had been yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. It was patient. It had always been patient. 300 years. The engineering deck's reactor housing had been running beyond its tolerances for 72 hours. It did not go in one event. The first reactor gave way quietly in the register of a system that has simply run out of what it needed to continue. The second followed 6 seconds later. The third took the engineering deck with it, and the engineering deck took everything above it in the cascade failure of power systems that had been holding each other in place and had nothing left to hold with. It was not a weapon detonating, it was consequence arriving. The fires, the structural failures, the pressure events, the swarm moving through it in the last hour, all of it reaching its resolution in the engineering deck's bones simultaneously. And the physics proceeding from there without consultation or ceremony. The explosion was visible from every ship still in the sector. It was the brightest thing in this part of space for 11 seconds. Then it was not. And where the vault of whispered ledgers had been, there was an expanding field of debris and heat and the residue of 3 centuries. 3 centuries of commerce, of habitation, of the million souls who had called it home. At its height, and the hundreds of thousands who had been inside it in its last hours, and the amber light that had burned in its corridors since before any of the beings in the surrounding ships had been alive. The swarm carriers nearest the hull took the blast across their forward biomembranes, not destroyed, disrupted. The harmonic fractured briefly in the carriers nearest the explosion, several going dark for seconds before the network redistributed and pulled them back. The drones still inside the vault when the engineering deck went were part of the debris field now. The harmonic had calculated the failure timeline and withdrawn most of them before the cascade. Not all. What it did not withdraw went with the vault. On the command bridge of the lead dreadnought, Thorruk saw the flash on the forward viewport and watched it for the 11 seconds it lasted. He did not look away. The succession war moved on the tactical display around him, formation shifts, clan detachments drawing apart, the fleet becoming 5 things instead of 1. And he watched the flash until the flash was finished and the sector returned to what it was going to be from now on. He had looked long enough. The vault was a fact. Kelvor was a fact. Krennak was a fact. He added them to what he was carrying and turned back to the tactical display and to what the moment required. On the Luminarch Etherius, the Veil Stream told Sivillith before the light reached her, the vault going dark in the current, not the gradual dimming of things ending one by one. She had been feeling that for hours. This was a single collective extinguishing, the frequency of 300,000 square meters of inhabited space ceasing to be inhabited in one event. The Veil Stream recorded it completely, without judgment, as a frequency added to the frequencies already there. Then the flash reached the Etherias as photons, the physical world confirming what the metaphysical one had already told her. The silver lines on her hands were very bright in the flash's reflection on the crystal floor, brighter than their resting state, the channels responding to what was moving through the current, the light of the vault's ending reflected in the architecture of a body built to feel such things. Then the flash was gone and the silver lines returned to their resting state, and she remained where she was, her hands flat on the crystal floor, for a long time after. Aboard the Defiance, the sensor array logged the flash as a spike outside its measurement parameters. The jury-rigged secondary attempted to categorize it, failed, and defaulted to the raw number. Vasquez looked at the raw number. He knew what it meant. The vault of whispered ledgers was a number on a damaged sensor array and a debris field on a long-range scan, and 55,000 people in his ships who were alive because of what had happened inside it, and the unknown number who were not. He did not stop running. He would not stop running until his ships were somewhere that running was no longer the operative word. He looked at the number for 3 seconds. Then he looked at the course heading. The Defiance kept moving. In the sector's remaining geography, the 14 Corvan vessels that had lost their harmonic connection when Kalvren died were still drifting on their last given vectors. In the hours since the battle, several had moved into proximity with the entity fragment, not by decision but by the mechanics of heading and drift, the fragment's slow movement bringing it into the paths the feral ships had been traveling, since their coordination failed. The fragment's root tendrils reached by reflex, as they had been reaching since the hammer's impact took the cognitive center away. The reflex did not distinguish between a Corvan biohull and any other surface, within reach. 2 of the 14 had drifted close enough. They were being absorbed the way the fist had been absorbed, slowly. The fragment's biology integrating what it found without understanding what it was finding, the root tissue pressing through bioarmor that did not resist in the way metal resisted, finding something at the cellular level closer to itself than anything else the fragment had touched. The 16 monarchs still connected to the harmonic calculated proximity as threat and pulled the remaining fleet back to safe distance. They did not engage the fragment. They observed it from the distance the harmonic had determined was sufficient, and recalibrated around what the sector had become. The sector settled. The debris field expanded at the speed physics allowed and no faster. The gate hung where it had always hung. The fragment drifted where the impact had sent it, still reaching, still breathing, still waiting for instructions that would not come from the cognitive center it no longer had. The amber light did not burn in the debris field. There were no longer sections for it to burn in. The vault of whispered ledgers had burned it for 300 years, through commerce and occupation and riot and the swarm moving through its corridors in the last hour, and now the vault was a debris field expanding at the speed physics allowed, and the amber light was not burning, and it would not burn again. End of episode 12. And thank you for listening.